INFJs are often difficult to figure out. This is because INFJs have a tendency to appear incredibly open and warm, yet remain emotionally guarded and private. They might ask profound, soul-searching questions that make you feel seen and valued, while at the same time revealing very little about their own internal world. It creates a dynamic where you feel deeply connected to them, only to later realize that you barely know who they really are. They have a strong sense of empathy and can intuitively understand what others are feeling, often before the person themselves is even aware of it. This ability to read people with accuracy can be disarming. However, the confusion deepens when their emotional landscape shifts unexpectedly, seemingly without warning. One day, they may be warm, engaging, and deeply involved. The next, distant and withdrawn. This happens because INFJs need time alone to recharge, but their disappearances are rarely announced or explained, leaving others to wonder what changed or whether something went wrong. Their idealism is another trait that makes it hard to figure them out. INFJs are often deeply committed to values and causes that align with their personal vision of a better world. They speak with passion and conviction about abstract ideals, yet they're also highly pragmatic when it comes to executing their plans. This blend of visionary dreaming and grounded action is rare. One moment, they are contemplating the philosophical underpinnings of justice. The next, they are creating a spreadsheet to implement a plan. It's like dealing with a philosopher and an operations manager in the same body. Disorienting, but fascinating. Check out our newly released INFJ Mastery Course, an INFJ ebook. The links are in the description of this video. Communication with INFJs can be perplexing as well. They often speak in metaphors, symbols, or abstract language that reflects the rich inner world they inhabit. This imaginative style can make their intentions difficult to decipher, especially for those who prefer direct, literal communication. At times, INFJs assume that others can read between the lines or pick up on subtle cues, leading to misunderstandings. When others fail to grasp the nuances, INFJs might withdraw or grow frustrated, further compounding the confusion. Relationships with INFJs can be both deeply fulfilling and maddeningly complex. They crave deep, authentic connections, but are often slow to trust and open up fully. They might express affection in indirect or non-traditional ways, expecting you to recognize the significance of small gestures or rare words. Their intense emotional insight can make you feel truly understood, but their reluctance to express their own needs or vulnerabilities leaves you unsure where you stand with them. INFJs have a desire to help others, but they don't like accepting help themselves. INFJs often see themselves as caretakers or guides, ready to support those they care about, even at great personal cost. Yet when the roles are reversed, they may resist assistance, retreating inward rather than allowing others to carry some of their burdens. This one-sided vulnerability can confuse and frustrate those who wish to be closer to them. Their internal conflicts are often hidden from view. Outwardly composed and thoughtful, INFJs can be waging intense inner battles that no one else sees. They are perfectionists with high expectations for themselves and the world, which leads to cycles of burnout and frustration. But they rarely let this show. They may smile and offer encouragement, even while privately questioning their purpose or doubting their impact. This incongruence between what they show and what they feel adds yet another layer of mystery. Another reason INFJs are hard to understand is their chameleon-like nature in social settings. They often adapt themselves to the emotional needs and personalities of the people they're with, which can make them seem like different people depending on the context. Around one person, they might be contemplative and serene. Around another, playful and sarcastic. This isn't deception. It's empathy at its most adaptive. INFJs naturally tune into the emotional frequency of the room, but this fluidity in presentation can make it hard to pin down who they truly are. People may walk away feeling close to them, only to later realize they don't actually know what the INFJ genuinely believes, wants, or feels. Then there's their uncanny ability to predict outcomes, sometimes events, sometimes people's emotional responses, without being able to logically explain how they know what they know. It can feel eerie. This insight comes from their dominant function, introverted intuition, which draws meaning from patterns that are often invisible to others. INFJs will confidently declare how a situation is going to unfold, then watch it play out exactly as predicted, all while offering very little rationale. To people who rely on tangible data and straightforward logic, this can seem like either guesswork or some kind of intuition-based sorcery. INFJs also have a strange relationship with confrontation. They detest conflict and will go to great lengths to avoid it, often biting their tongues or compromising more than they should just to keep the peace. But this aversion can suddenly snap. When a boundary has been silently crossed too many times, the INFJ may erupt with intensity that seems to come out of nowhere. They've likely been collecting grievances quietly, trying to make sense of things or give people the benefit of the doubt. But when they hit their threshold, the shift is jarring, calm, supportive presence one moment, righteous fury or cold detachment the next. It catches people off guard, partly because the INFJ never gave warning signs in the first place. Their perfectionism is another hidden trait that adds to the confusion. On the surface, they may seem easygoing or even whimsical, but internally, INFJs can be relentlessly self-critical. They hold themselves to impossibly high standards, often feeling guilty for not living up to their own ideals. Despite appearing outwardly composed, they may be quietly berating themselves for perceived failures. This internal dissonance between how they seem and how they feel can lead to periods of burnout or depressive withdrawal, which seem to come out of nowhere to those who aren't paying close attention. They also tend to disappear emotionally, mentally, or physically when they need to process something deeply. To an INFJ, solitude isn't just rest. It's necessary for psychological survival. But the way they detach can feel sudden or dramatic to others. They might ghost for days or weeks, not because they're angry or indifferent, but because they're overwhelmed and need to realign with their inner self. Ironically, during this period of withdrawal, they're often thinking intensely about their relationships and how to return to them with greater clarity. To the outside world, though, it just looks like vanishing. In romantic relationships, INFJs also tend to be mysteries to their partners. They yearn for a soul-level connection, and once they decide someone is their person, they can be fiercely loyal, even obsessive in their desire to understand, support, and grow with that person. But they also fear losing themselves in the relationship. They may crave intimacy and then pull away from it, retreating into their inner world for periods of solitude that don't make sense to a partner who only saw affection moments earlier. They're not trying to play games. They're trying to maintain equilibrium in a storm of internal emotional processing. INFJs often feel they are too much and not enough at the same time. They have rich inner lives filled with dreams, ideals, and visions, but frequently worry that sharing those too freely will lead to rejection or misunderstanding. So they edit themselves. They may downplay their emotions, dilute their opinions, or soften their intensity to make others more comfortable. But this editing only makes them feel more alienated, as if no one is truly seeing the full spectrum of who they are. This sense of inner invisibility feeds a cycle of longing for deep connection while fearing what it might cost. What makes INFJs particularly perplexing is that every act of contradiction, every vanishing, every unexpected burst of intensity is born from sincerity. They are not manipulative or erratic by nature. They simply exist at the crossroads of feeling and foresight, of idealism and realism, of deep connection and overwhelming sensitivity. They are constantly reconciling what they sense with what they feel, and what they believe with what they experience. To be around them is to witness a quiet storm, a soul striving to live authentically in a world that often demands simplicity from a mind that is anything but simple. INFJs often seem like a walking contradiction because their internal experience is so vastly different from what they allow others to see. They can come across as calm, stable, and even stoic, while beneath the surface there's a flood of emotion, philosophical reflection, and spiritual searching. This dissonance is not meant to mislead anyone. It's just how they survive in a world that often doesn't hold space for such depth. While they may nod along politely during small talk, their minds are elsewhere, drifting through existential questions or imagining the emotional histories of everyone in the room. Others may feel like they're fully present, but to the INFJ, the room is just one layer of a much broader, multidimensional experience. What makes this even more baffling is how they can be intensely focused on people, almost to the point of obsession, and yet feel perpetually misunderstood. INFJs notice subtle facial expressions, voice inflections, word choices, and energies in a room. They care deeply about how others are feeling and often intuit what someone needs before they even ask. But when they express themselves, they often feel like they're speaking a different language. Their ideas and emotions are complex and nuanced, and translating those inner realities into words that others can actually understand is exhausting. So they default to silence or surface-level agreement, even when their inner truth is dying to be heard. That silence makes them seem passive or withdrawn, but in reality, it's the opposite. They're overwhelmed by everything they want to say and feel they can't. INFJs don't forget things easily. Not the tone in someone's voice during an argument from 3 years ago, not a broken promise, not a moment that made them feel either deeply cherished or quietly dismissed. But they rarely bring these memories up, at least not right away. Instead, they file them away, storing each emotional impression like a reference point. Later, seemingly out of nowhere, they may express hurt over something that others thought was long resolved or too minor to matter. This isn't about being petty, it's about emotional consistency. INFJs see meaning in everything. So what others view as a passing comment or minor oversight can live rent-free in an INFJ psyche for years. They often hold strong convictions and moral ideals, yet they aren't quick to judge others. In fact, they're often the last people to cast blame or jump to conclusions. They see every side, every nuance, every reason why someone might have acted a certain way. This makes them seem indecisive or overly forgiving, but it stems from their desire to understand rather than condemn. However, once they do decide something or someone has violated a core value, especially when it comes to authenticity or cruelty, they can cut ties with surgical precision. This sudden shift from compassion to distance is bewildering to those who thought they had an unshakable place in the INFJ's heart. One of the most bewildering things about INFJs is their subtle intensity. They don't need to raise their voice or assert dominance to change the atmosphere in a room. Their mere presence, when truly engaged, can feel deeply magnetic or unsettling. They might look at someone with such soulful attention that it unnerves them. They ask questions that seem to bypass the surface of a conversation and tunnel straight into your inner life. And yet, the moment you try to flip the spotlight back on them, they deflect gracefully, politely, but unmistakably. It feels like being invited into a cathedral only to find the sanctuary locked. In creative or intellectual spaces, INFJs can also be confounding. They often have wildly imaginative ideas, otherworldly, symbolic, poetic, but they may hesitate to share them, convinced that no one will understand, or worse, that they will be dismissed. When they do finally share, their ideas are often either far ahead of their time or shrouded in layers of meaning that require interpretation. They create from a place of inner necessity, not for performance or applause. This seriousness, paired with their ambiguity, can make others see them as overly mysterious or intense, when really they're just trying to express something they can barely articulate, even to themselves. The confusion surrounding INFJs often intensifies the closer you get to them. On the surface, they may appear calm, composed, and even shy, someone who listens more than they speak, who seems agreeable, gentle, and unassuming. But as you draw closer, you begin to notice there's far more going on beneath the surface than you initially realized. The deeper layers begin to reveal a complex mixture of emotional intensity, intuitive insight, fierce independence, and a mind that never stops analyzing the meaning of everything. It's not a slow unfolding so much as a quiet revelation that what you thought you understood was only the first veil. One of the most baffling aspects of INFJs is how they long for intimacy, but struggle with vulnerability. They want nothing more than a deep, soul-level connection with another person, something real, raw, transformative, but their trust is hard-won, and their self-disclosure even harder. They're hypersensitive to rejection and betrayal, often carrying past emotional wounds with them like silent maps of what not to do or say again. So even as they open themselves to love and connection, they may simultaneously retreat, sabotage, or test the waters in ways that feel emotionally contradictory. You might feel pulled in close by their emotional depth, only to be held at arm's length when you reach to hold them back. They're also surprisingly strategic for such emotional beings. While they may seem dreamy or otherworldly at times, INFJs are often running a long-term plan behind the scenes. Their idealism is rarely without a roadmap. They may not speak their plans aloud, but they have them, calculated, carefully thought out, and usually aligned with some moral or philosophical goal. What throws people off is that INFJs don't lead with their ambition. They quietly pursue their visions, building, adjusting, perfecting in silence until suddenly they emerge with something fully formed. This ability to work in secrecy and then surprise people with their depth of accomplishment feels almost magical, as if they were living an entirely different life in their head that no one else knew about. INFJs want to be seen, known, and chosen, but not possessed. They want to belong to something meaningful, yet they fiercely protect their autonomy and inner space. In relationships, this can create moments of dissonance. One day, they may speak of soul mates and forever, and the next they may talk about needing more space or feeling stifled. Their partners are often left wondering whether the INFJ wants to be close or free, and the answer is usually both. The INFJ doesn't always know how to hold those two needs at once either, and this inner conflict plays out in ways that seem erratic or emotionally mixed. Their sense of identity is another thing that's difficult to figure out about them. INFJs are always growing, always evolving. They shed old skins and beliefs with quiet regularity, constantly reassessing who they are and what they believe in. To others, this can look like inconsistency, but to the INFJ, it's integrity. They don't cling to labels or rigid roles. They are guided by an inner compass, one that doesn't always align with societal norms or external expectations. This can make them seem like shapeshifters, difficult to define, difficult to predict. One year, they may be living a conventional lifestyle. The next, they may completely reinvent themselves to pursue a calling no one else saw coming. What they need, what they value, and how they live is often driven by inner revelation more than external logic. They also seem to have an emotional duality. INFJs can be incredibly empathetic, crying over the suffering of a stranger or becoming deeply moved by art, music, or nature. At the same time, they can be surprisingly detached and clinical in how they analyze situations, especially when they're trying to make sense of something painful. This emotional toggling can make them seem cold when others expect warmth, or too emotional when others want logic. They live in both realms, flipping between heart and head in ways that don't always align with what others expect. INFJs are often painfully aware of how confusing they are to others, and yet they rarely feel truly seen. They can sense when people misunderstand them, reduce them, or mistake their depth for aloofness, their warmth for flirtation, their insight for judgment, their complexity for indecision. But instead of correcting these misunderstandings directly, INFJs often internalize them, withdrawing further into themselves. They don't want to have to explain who they are. They want someone to take the time to understand them without being asked. And when that understanding doesn't come, it deepens their sense of alienation. INFJs are always balancing opposites, head and heart, self and other, solitude and intimacy, stillness and intensity, certainty and doubt. They walk through the world as emotional paradoxes with visionary minds, offering glimpses of their inner world in fragments, like pieces of a mosaic that never fully comes into view. You may spend years trying to understand them, only to realize that the deeper you go, the more mysterious they become. And maybe that's part of their beauty, that some people were never meant to be figured out, only appreciated for the mystery they carry. Check out our newly released INFJ Master Course and INFJ ebook. The links are in the description of this video.